really need to get together and let our voices be heard.
This is Buffalo What's Next. I'm Jay Moran.
I'm Bridget Jaipal Valenza.
I'm Dave Debo.
And I'm Thomas O'Neill White.
After May 14th, how can we afford not to talk about race?
About education, about segregation, about humanity.
Since the dawn of this nation, racial violence has existed.
The way we have designed our society has a big hand in what occurred in that Tops Market.
The suburban area, everywhere, we must work and teach our children.
We need to make sure that we put more funding in our programs that help prevent gun violence and more money into art.
If we're going to have some real healing, we've got to have space to tell some uncomfortable truths.
And good morning. Welcome to WBFO's Buffalo What's Next. Coming up later in the program, Dave Debo is going to talk with Francisco Vasquez, the President Emeritus of Child and Family Services. But our first guest has a lot of things to offer us this morning in terms of his experience. A young man who has lived a lot of life already since his time here in Buffalo. Paul Perez is with us this morning. Paul, thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Peace. How y'all doing?
Well, we're doing okay. Paul is involved in a lot of different things. He says he's the site director for home headquarters, but that's his 9 to 5, as he tells me. But he is involved in a couple of other things, a lot of it having to do with real estate, better living interests, and also better living logistics, too, correct, as well. So we want to get into all those things. But I think, Paul, one of the things that really strikes us about your experience and your thoughts is just about when it comes to generational wealth and the lack thereof when it comes to a lot of black people. Mm-hmm. Just a general thought about that, what you are seeing and how perhaps maybe you're going about your experience to try to overcome that.
For sure. Well, I take my experience back to my origins, right? I'm originally from the South Bronx, New York City, home of the Yankees. For everybody that loves them out there, we appreciate it. Coming from that environment, I tell people, especially here in Buffalo and Western New York, I'm pretty much the equivalent of your Bailey Kensington, your Broadway Fillmore neighborhoods, underserved, the forgotten communities. New York City, yes, is big, 8 million people. The Bronx alone is 2.8 million, but we don't get the same services and the same resources that other communities or affluent communities get. And when we do get it, it's more so as we're targeted, like a targeted population and quotas for organizations and groups. So for me, growing up in New York, growing up as a kid, I saw those adversities of crime. I saw violence. I saw drugs and what that did to not only my community, but, what those things did and hit my home. I've had the good, where I had law enforcement. I have family who are detectives, NYPD. I have also family and friends that also serve time in Rikers, and I also have a father-in-law who was a corrections officer in Rikers. So I got to see, both paradigms of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I took the initiative, and I really just had this inner self-motivation that a lot of people, tell me about, sometimes to my own detriment, but they always say, man, you're so confident in yourself. Like, you just don't stop. You keep believing in yourself and you keep going. And that's what led me to go to school, do what I had to do. I played sports, and I eventually...
Did you play ball at Buff State?
No, I didn't get to play ball at Buff State, but I thought I was when I initially came up here. I thought I was going to I thought I was going to play football. I was like, okay, it's a D3. I could probably just go in as a walk-on and do my thing. But I went to Buff State. That's what led me here in 2007, undergrad. And then I had got into some things to my own doing, young kid coming up from New York City. What was it like coming into Buffalo from New York City and that Buff State community? It was a culture shock. I think for me, Buffalo itself is very different from New York City. The housing, the atmosphere is more of a hometown type of feel here, whereas in New York, it's a big city, But I do love the fact that, all my friends from Buffalo, everybody here, my family, they love the Bills. You know, you can't get away from it. You know, so they have been trying to convert me for several years now, even when the team wasn't doing too well, to be a Bills fan. So you know, in my mind, I'm a Giants.
Okay.
You know, I rep New York City, but I do support the Buffalo Bills, and I'm happy to see them win.
And we're happy to have you along on the wagon, that's for sure, as we go through hopefully a great season here.
For sure.
Well, let's then talk about when we go when it comes to Black generational wealth. This is interesting. You've looked at the situation. What are the things that stand out? What are things that people need to understand when it comes to Black generational wealth and some of the issues? I think the statistic I've seen is the average Black household has 1/10 of the retirement income built up or savings built up that the average white household would have.
Yeah, and I also, like, another alarming statistic was I learned that Black population, though maybe 12% of the country's population, only owns 1% of the country's wealth. And within the next 20 years, that population will own less than 1% of the country's wealth. And I look at, you know, other groups like Jewish Americans or Chinese Americans, and I just see how they are a smaller population in size, but they own more than the Black population. I want to say within the Jewish community is about in the 20 percentile rate. So to me, it just was a sticking point. And to the earlier point of me coming to Buffalo, I had to live off campus. So when I lived off campus, I was living on Grant and Bradley, and I was entrenched in the West Side. And I was like, oh, okay, this is comfortable. I'm familiar with this. I come from the Bronx. This looks, you know, very similar to where I come from. And then I started noticing, like, you know, yeah, I'm in the Bronx. I'm now in Buffalo, but man, like, these houses are like in turmoil. Like, I was living next door to vacant, abandoned properties. You know, my apartment essentially was what they considered an old trap house. So they used to sell drugs out of there a long time ago. And they thought because now I lived there that, you know, they were still selling drugs. So people would knock on the back of our door, you know, trying to get drugs. And we kind of had to tell them, like, no, we don't. We're college students. We're just here, you know, just to rent and go to school. So it took some time. But now, you know, if you drive on all along Grand Street, you have now seen that transformation of that community and what that community looks like. And to your point about the generational wealth, you know, you think about all those families and those peoples that originally lived there in the west side of Buffalo, in the east sides of Buffalo, even the Fruit Belt part of Buffalo, and you see how now those neighborhoods were, you know, entirely destituted, weren't the areas of interest. Nobody wanted to put money or resources into there or even dare live there. And now it's, you know, where to be. You know, people are buying. I'm seeing nothing but new construction.
Are you seeing that in your real estate?
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm constantly driving. I'm constantly, you know, talking to people. I'm constantly helping people in my position as a site director. We do down payment. We do 2% down payment mortgages with no PMI. We also do home improvement loans and grants for single-family homeowners and also for multi-use. So for landlords that invest in properties here, specifically in Buffalo, they would qualify for a grant in combination with a loan. And we also do new construction. That's what the company does. So I'm constantly doing that on my daily work. And then on my own business, you know, I'm looking at the community, and I had the privilege of, when I had finished school and I was going into grad school at Buffalo State College, I got an internship in City Hall. And when I was working in City Hall, I was working in the Division of Citizen Services. So I got to get a feel of what does the ombudsman of the city of Buffalo look like, where all the calls, where all the concerns, you know, the hotline essentially, and get connected to all the city departments. And that's where I eventually leveled up and graduated with my master's degree, and I became the coordinator for the Save Our Streets Task Force. And in that time, that's when I started doing all these clean sweep programs all throughout the city. And I was looking at data to match the resources with the different organizations to come out there and do it on a weekly basis.
Let's talk about the Clean Sweeps initiative. Now, you're not involved in it like you were at that time.
Correct.
But what is it exactly? Just to make sure we understand what we're talking about here.
Sure. So the Clean Sweep is a unique public-private partnership. Basically, it's headed from the mayor's office, and it just connects all the city departments, county agencies, state agencies, federal agencies, along with not-for-profits, local not-for-profits, and local businesses to go into the community and provide resources and services, whether it be broken into 3 teams. So there's the beautification and restoration team, cleaning up the vacant houses. Before, when I first started, they were demolishing vacant houses.
Right.
That has changed now. But
and as a real estate person, you think that's good?
I do. I do. Because I think that now we're at the point where everything is cleared, and now we need to start building.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right. So then you had that, and then you also had the community outreach teams, which is one of my favorite groups because they go out door to door and they're giving their information and services, talking to the residents in the community. Also, not only just giving services, but collecting information and data from the community members to then better enable us as a city at the time to, deliver these services in a more effective manner. And then you have the what we call codes and law enforcement, and that was probably, to me, one of the greatest parts of it is because now you get to have community police officers going into the community, speaking to the residents and working with them. At the same time, you also have housing code officials going out there and, doing summonses and warnings for those that need repairs, specifically, those absentee landlords that are out there that do like to take advantage of, renters. And I could speak to that, being a renter, coming from Section 8 housing. Even when I was in college, I had food stamps while going to school full-time at Buffalo State College, But just because I was on government services to get to that next step in my life doesn't mean that I didn't deserve the same good, fair, equitable quality of life like anyone else does. We're all paying the same money, so, provide the same equitable services. So to me, working on that, being a part of that, leading that initiative really helped me kind of lead my direction into what I want to do with the rest of my life and specifically my career.
We're talking with Paul Perez this morning on Buffalo What's Next. A lot of different things that we can talk about here, and we did touch upon the generational wealth. But I'm interested at your experience, though, with the Clean Sweep program or initiative and the outreach part of it. That's interesting to me. So you're going up to houses on a given street, a given block or whatever, walking up to people. What kind of reactions did you get?
Continuously, good, received well. People like that. People do want to see.
They appreciated that contact.
Of course. Especially, when I'm going out there representing the organization that I work for, home headquarters, and I'm, providing them with information and an application saying, hey, listen, we can help you with your roof. We can help you with your foundation. We can help you with your windows that are in such, need of repair because those are the original windows that you got the house when it was built,
Right.
So for me, all of that just allows me to reach the people effectively on a one-on-one basis. And at the same time, it also allows me to constantly receive new ideas, receive new information, like what is the people in need of? Because I think a lot of times with organizations, they all have good intentions. And even in government, anywhere you go, even business, right? Everybody has their idea. They came up, they did what they had to do, they excelled, they exceeded, and they reached a certain point. But then that could also be your ceiling. You don't want to apex, you want to keep going. Right. So you got to also know that the people in which you serve, they're the ones who steer the ship. So just always having that ear and eyes on the street and your heart connected to those people really helps make you genuine. And I think for me, that's always been like my staple here in Buffalo, and why I've been received so well is, to many other community members when I go to block club meetings, speaking to the board of block clubs, talking to different organizations, going to town hall meetings, they always look at me and receive me as like a young brother, or to the elder women, right. I'm usually like their young grandson, so I appreciate that and I'm thankful, and they always see me as he's here to help. So I appreciate that, and I'm always trying.
Because that's not always the reaction, I would think. That not everybody is necessarily accepted when it comes to, hey, I'm here to help. Yeah, everybody's here to help, but maybe not everybody is accepting that outside help as much. But yet you find a different experience.
For sure. I mean, I always told myself as, what's the definition of leadership? And to me, my personal opinion is leadership is someone who's close enough to relate to, yet I had enough to follow. And I've been through the trenches. I'm from the hood. I'm
Right.
from these neighborhoods. So I know what it is to struggle. I know what it is to, just keep trying and trying to do the right thing and doing the right thing and consistently putting your best foot forward and having faith in God. At the same time, taking those blessings and now leveraging it and working on it. And as you go up, I took the stairs, I go up, I'm always looking back as how can I help the next person? So, I'm a community champion at heart. I just have different outlets as to how I can do that.
Right, no doubt. It's impressive the way you've gone about doing this, for sure. When you look at kids, 16, 15, 14-year-old kids, do you think back to the kids that you were growing up with in the South Bronx? Do you think of yourself? And, what can you say to these kids?
For sure. Actually, I spoke to them this summer. We had a shout out to the Yale Academy, my brother Lee Anthony Freeman, Buffalo native, also a fraternity brother of mine, Prince Hall Mason, Ionic Lodge number 88. And
You're always networking, are you?
Listen, I'm always working. I'm in the community. I'm here. I'm really entrenched into this work, and this is my heart. This is my passion. And I think that you can always, I told the kids. So what I did was over the summer, I taught them about credit, right? I taught them about the basic principles of credit, how to use that, what does that look like for themselves. I taught them about how to create an LLC, and I taught them about real estate. And I'm a big proponent of the three most financially successful people in the country, right, tend to be those who invest in real estate, right, those who invest in stocks and bonds, right? As we saw in the Great Recession, those groups, those organizations still rose, right? The same thing with the housing market. It took a hit, but it still rose to, incredible new heights now. And then those who also own businesses. Those three groups or people, you can be all of one or you could be two of three, but you got to be in one of those fields because those are the people that get the most tax benefits. Those are the people that actually rise with the tide when the economy comes back. So, for me, going back to the Black wealth and what I spoke with the students, I was teaching them, this is how you build Black wealth. This is how you build that passive income or just even have assets in which you own that if anything happens or things hit the fan, you have this for yourself and your family, and you could potentially live off of this and pass this down to the next generation, and the next generation is what we need to focus on.
When you look at kids like that, like you were talking to this summer, I'm sure they were enraptured with the idea of having the possibility of having wealth, but at the same time, there must be pitfalls. What do you see are the pitfalls for young people?
For sure. I mean, speaking to my Black and brown community here in Buffalo and to nationwide and even further throughout in the worldwide, we're not privy to those resources. We're not privy to those conversations. Our education system really doesn't put an emphasis on teaching kids, even in college, teaching you about credit, like what is your FICO score, simple things like that, a budget. I always start off my credit classes and consultations with, do you have a budget? Okay, you don't have a budget? All right, we need to work on a budget. Basic, simple, what's your income, what's your expenses, this is your net operating income. This is what you have left over to work with. And then when we have those conversations and we go through those exercises, they start to realize like, yeah, I wanted a car, but you know what? This car may be a little bit too much right now. So let me just save up and then I'll eventually get a car when I have 3 months of savings, or I have, 3 months of my car payment. My rent is paid. I have all my bills in order. And I can sustain myself, to my next job or my next position in my career.
It sounds like obviously a great approach to things. At the same time, kids are being marketed to, right?
Mm-hmm.
From outside interests who, they don't really care about their budget. They don't really care about their generational wealth. They just care about getting their money from their pockets into their corporate coffers. Is that something that you see as a troubling landscape as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think even for adults, not even just children.
Sure, trust me.
I think a lot of us, and it's just the American way, right? Even America, I can't tell, the micro how to do things if we're not acknowledging the macro. And the macro is that America's in debt. Trillions of dollars in debt to other nations, right, that we're supposedly competing against. And it's like, how can you get out of that? Well, you got to be a producer. You gotta stray away from being a consumer and start focusing on being a producer. And I think for us, I like nice things. I like to wear,
you got amazing sneakers.
Oh, appreciate it, brother. Appreciate it. Shout out to Y3, Yohoji Yamamatsu, and shout out to Soho in New York City. We out here.
Okay.
But I do like nice things, and I did show the kids. I showed the kids that, I'm driving a Tesla. I did show the kids, I do have all the, the new Yeezys and stuff like that. But I only have what I have because I could afford it. And that's what we got to get into. We got to get into the mindset of what is affordability. And there's things that I have passed up on because I'm willing to have that delayed gratification. For me, having to have food stamps, having to, grind and go to Buff State full time, go travel all the way to the mall because the bus took an hour just to get all the way out to Cheektowaga, and I only had but maybe $20 in my pocket for the week to, basically buy any food at that time, outside of the food that I had at my house. It put a lot of things in perspective, and that adversity, those obstacles really helped refine me and focus me in to say, all right, you need to get the things that you need, and then you can, scale up. You could start building your income, and then you can budget and have, maybe 10% allocated to things that you want, and preserve your stuff, protect your stuff. There's getting things, right, that you want, or getting assets. Then there's protecting those assets, right, that you want. And then there's expanding and building on those assets to try to accumulate more. And that's the American way. That's the true American way. We follow the leaders, the entrepreneurs, those business owners. The civil rights movement was led by the entrepreneurs and the blacks that, who invested in the community. They had to pay for Martin Luther King and all of these civil rights leaders to go on these buses, to travel, to preach the good word. But there was still money involved. We still live in a capitalist democracy. And we saw in the 2016 elections and beyond, even currently with Joe Biden, that capitalism is always going to win because how do they pay for these billion-dollar now campaigns?
Right.
It's money. So if we can preserve our money and take our money and use it like seeds, right? So the wise farmer is going to plant that seed and give it the nourishment that it needs so that way it can grow. But if your money is like a seed and you're not planting them and you're not growing them, then what are you doing? Are you eating them? Are you throwing them away? What are you going to do when, there's a drought? There's no abundance. You got to be able to have some self-sustainability. And that's my biggest thing to promote to the community is we need to start focusing on being producers instead of just being consumers.
And I think you actually just answered the question right there, but I'll ask it anyway. For this community, for the Buffalo community, you're obviously a big picture guy, yet you're working down in the trenches at the same time.
Right.
What's obstructing that message from the community?
Definitely the media. We have in our community, a lot of negative depictions of ourselves. We too much associate wealth with material things. And that's why, for me, it's kind of like you got to have the sugar before you give the vinegar, right? So I showed them, like, yes, you can have nice things, and you can do it with integrity and build and take care of your family. We do have obstructions, and I'm proud to say it, and it's just not local, but just overall too, right? Like governments, the government has failed Black people consistently. We tend to be sold what we call in our neighborhoods the wolf tickets.
The wolf tickets.
A wolf ticket. So basically, you know, it's like crying wolf, you know, but it doesn't amount to anything. And I think for us, we need to stop trying to put all our eggs in the basket of, you know, hope and government, because government can't just do everything by itself, you know. And I learned that when I worked in City Hall. Like, it was great and it was a beautiful opportunity, and I'm forever thankful because it allowed me to start my career and really understand the community and what I want to do. But I also acknowledged and learned that as much as I was going into these communities that were underserved and putting all the resources and energy into it, I also realized that the community is the number one leader for the community to get out to rise. So, you know, that's why I'm really a big proponent on not putting blames to anyone, yet, you know, acknowledging the atrocities and the things that are going on, speaking truth to power, right? And at the same time, going back to my community and saying, hey, we have to do better. We have to invest in ourselves. And investing in ourselves is not just, you know, purchasing the assets. Investing in ourselves starts with, you know, our health. Our mental health, our spiritual health, you know, making sure that we're taking care of our household. You know, is there love going on within each other? Like, can you see your fellow brother in the neighborhood and just say, you know, peace, brother, peace, king, how you doing today? You know, like, my shine is your shine and vice versa. You know, I want to see you win because you winning makes me feel good and I'm winning. So, you know, just being a part of that and working together as a community, I think really is what's going to help take us to the next level. And, you know, you just got to take the time, right? Because I tell the kids specifically, I'm like, y'all on TikTok, y'all on IG, right? But you're looking at sneakers, you're looking at cars, you're looking at clothes, you know, but are you looking at ways to, you know, create some wealth for yourself? Because the job markets are scarce. You know, I remember even myself coming up, 21 years old, bachelor's degree, refined. I could come in with a suit and tie, but I'm still not getting the same job opportunities as, you know, my white counterparts that come from more affluent communities.
What did you do?
I just kept pushing. I just kept saying to myself, you know, listen, you're going to win. It's going to come. There will be a break for yourself. But you also need to learn that you have to build something on your own. And, you know, when I did get the opportunity in the door, right, the blessings from others and all the people that had looked out for me, I took that opportunity and I ran with it. And I said, okay, now I'm in, but this isn't the end all be all, because I think this is relatable across the board, you know, whether white, black, or whatever your ethnicity. When you're going to college, you know, you're in that rat race. So you're in college thinking, I'm going to get out of school, I'm going to get a good job, and everything's going to be okay. Well, that's not really it, right? You sold a wolf ticket.
There we go. What I had when I graduated from Buff State.
Yes, you got a wolf degree.
Paul Perez
yes.
is with us this morning on Buffalo What's Next for another 4 minutes or so. We did, you know, I really wanted to get into the real estate.
I'm here. I'm free.
But we only have a couple of minutes here.
Yeah.
You know, there, like we talked about earlier, the demolitions have stopped for the most part.
Sure.
There are a lot of empty lots in the city of Buffalo.
Yes, sir.
Are they opportunities for building? What do you think? What are the possibilities?
Yes, they are truly opportunities for building. I am a new developer here in Buffalo. Started out, I purchased my 3-unit home. So to speak to that, so how to get out of that rat race, you got to start getting those assets. You know, I read books like Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I went on YouTube, people. There's a lot of information, free information on YouTube that you can learn from and benefit from. And I started learning about real estate, got my loan origination license, went and got my HUD certification, worked at NACA, closed over $14 million worth of loans. And then I started realizing, I want to buy some assets, buy more properties, but the purchase prices were getting too high. Sure. And then I started looking and I'm like, well, I have a big, massive backyard, you know, in my North Buffalo 3-unit home. Why don't I just build on it? I'm coming from New York City. You know, we build vertically. We live vertically.
Right.
So I'm like, all right, let me just do that. So then I went, I put the initiative in, And I reached out to the city. I asked them about the green code, and things are within the green code. You know, if you're a homeowner or a potential homeowner and you want to see changes in your neighborhood, you need to go to the places that have the authority over what is going on in your government, right? Speak to your elected officials, speak to the department heads, and find out what you can do to be a solution and provide that solution. So I researched, I found an architect, I found a mechanical electrical engineer, I combined those plans together, I submitted it to the city, and now we're at the last stage of approval to get this project started. And I think that this is going to help catapult me and the movement of Black financial equity rights movement, and I'm coining that here in Buffalo
I like that.
and for the world. We got to now start owning and we got to start building. So we can't keep asking for others and every other group to come out and help us. We have to now do it within ourselves and for ourselves.
Yet at the same time, it seems like you're more than willing to help anytime.
Always around. I'm available. People see me. I've been on billboards. I'm out in the community meetings. I'm in town hall meetings. I'm in the clean sweeps. I'm going door to door. I'm around.
All right. Paul Perez Jr. is with us this morning on Buffalo What's Next. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you all. And keep believing in yourself. Remember that. Anything is possible when you believe in yourself.
Excellent words to end on. This is Buffalo What's Next on WBFO.
WBFO is your home for trusted news about your community. And WBFO The Bridge connects music and community. Hear local music from bands like Pharaoh from Buffalo, Tedesco Knows Best from Niagara Falls, and Stress Dolls from Buffalo every day on WBFO The Bridge. Listen at WBFO 88.7 HD2 or WNED 94.5 HD2, or stream it from WBFOthebridge.org or the WBFO The Bridge mobile app.
Not sure what you want to watch tonight? We've got you covered. Visit WNED.org/TV schedule to see what's on WNED PBS, WNED Create, and WNED PBS Kids. Click the Primetime button to see what's on tonight. You can also search for your favorite programs in the search bar or look for programs by date and time. Visit WNED.org/TV schedule and start making your viewing plans now.
This is Dave Debo. If you tease open any real discussion about race, you'll find at the heart of it there are always identity issues. Who are you? What do you look like? How are people treating you or thinking about you based on all of that? And that's an unease that is shared in at least parts of the Hispanic community. Francisco Vasquez is here. He tells that kind of personal story. Francisco is the retired president and CEO of Child and Family Services. He's also part of the Greater Buffalo Racial Equity Roundtable. Francisco, thanks for being with us.
Glad to be here.
Tell me about your origin story, because I think it gives us a way to look at racial issues in Western New York through a lens that is different than the typical African American or person of color.
Sure. I'm actually a transplant to the Buffalo area from Arizona, actually. I grew up in a very small town, Douglas, Arizona, which is right roughly in the southeastern corner of the state of Arizona. My home was 2 blocks from the border, from the fence. So I spent, obviously, my early years growing up in that small town. We lived in a fairly segregated community, although the major population there was Latino. We were segregated, frankly, in a part of the town south of the main downtown area. I went to a segregated school for the first 5 years of my life, 5 grades of my life, and didn't interconnect with other whites primarily until grade 5. I like to think about it as having lived in between, in a sense. In between the culture of my roots, the Mexican culture, and the culture of whiteness, which was primarily the education system in Douglas. I recall in grade 3 being punished on 3 different occasions. When I say punished, meaning paddled by the principal because I spoke Spanish in the playground. I recall my first day of first grade. My mother was asked to pin a 3x5 card with my name on it so that the teacher would know who I was. She wrote down Francisco Vasquez. When we sat down and the teacher started grading us, she went student by student, and again, we were all Latino children, student by student, and flipped the card over and anglicized our names. So I became Frank for a long time in my school years. The reason I raise that is it's living in between, in again the culture of my roots, the Mexican culture, and the culture of whiteness, and part of that journey is really trying to identify who I was. What is my identity? Am I present as white because my skin is white, but I don't identify as white because of my experience, and so I talk about being in between.
What kind of microaggressions or racism have you seen while inhabiting that middle ground? Maybe 1 foot in a white world and 1 foot in the Latino world.
I'll talk about it this way. Those people from my Mexican roots and my friends, my family members, especially family members outside of my own family, cousins and uncles and all, I was viewed as a vendido, as a sellout often, because I pursued the
you chased the white dream.
The white dream. And so you're in a position of being criticized because you're chasing that dream. On the other hand, my white counterparts would view me as a spick, as somebody who is different and distinct from them, not accepted necessarily. Again, living in between. So it affected the way that I identified for a long period of time. Initially, I didn't fight the
stereotypes?
The stereotypes and the attraction to whiteness. I didn't fight it. Later on in my years, I regretted that to a great extent. So I began in my high school years to fight to keep my proper name. And even today, people will freely call me Francisco or Frank because they just shorten
Either
it.
one today.
Even
Wow.
today. I don't fight it any longer because I get it. I understand the need to interact. I'd rather interact rather than try to fight the discomfort that I feel sometimes with being presented in a different way.
Let me go back to something you
Sure.
said a little bit earlier, though. You almost felt reluctant, or at least were criticized by others for embracing the white dream.
Yes.
What would your alternative have been? To just embrace your Mexican heritage and then put up with all sorts of incumbent discrimination? Which you ended up getting anyway.
Yeah. Frankly, that was the reality, though. I recall a cousin of mine who I visited with. I remember I was a freshman at the University of Arizona, and went to visit him, had lunch with him actually, and he worked for the park system in Tucson, and he said to me, "You'll be just like the rest of us. You'll drop out, and you'll you can come. I'll help you find a job with the city." I had other thoughts about what I wanted to do and what I wanted to pursue, but that was the the reaction, the mentality. I think I had uncles who would talk about you should really go work as a laborer because that's what we do. Yet I had mentors who were white who said, "Here's an opportunity, and we can help you." So, again, I had allies on one side and detractors on the other, but that began to shift also because I began to meet people who from my Latino side who were also on the same journey I was in, and found a common interest in pursuing different directions.
And this is almost a rhetorical question because I imagine the answer is yes, of course, Dave.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit about how universal your story is.
I think my story is fairly universal. I think that people who I grew up with, people who live in between, who straddle that border of our Latino culture and the white society. I think many of us struggle with that identity challenge, and it never leaves you. You're always aware of it. You're aware of where you fit in and where you don't fit in. You're aware of what you need to do to fit in on both sides. And so when I visit my family and folks and friends in Arizona, I take on a different persona, and I'm aware of it. I'm not uncomfortable about it because it helps me connect.
That was the next part I was going to ask you. Does it hurt?
Sometimes when I'm communicating with somebody and we're having a conversation about an issue, there's an expectation that I embrace a perspective or a belief that's rooted in our Mexican culture. But I've gone beyond that sometimes and have formed different opinions and all. And so it becomes very uncomfortable. And there are some conflicts that can emerge from that.
I also imagine, and if I'm wrong, please tell me, that you get frustrated sometimes by the singularity of discussions about race, because the kind of things you just described are not always part of the mainstream dialogue.
Yeah.
When racial equity, and you are a member of the Racial Equity Roundtable,
Right.
when racial equity is discussed, it's often not including this middle ground, these people like you that feel one foot in each world.
Yeah, I would never take a position that would be critical of my black brothers and sisters. But my point is that they have a unique history about their racial journey, distinct from mine even. But when most of the dialogue is about black and white, we lose that middle ground, that gap in between. And there's a lot of distinction in there. There's a lot of nuance in there. There's a brown area in there, if you will, that where there's a multitude of perspective, a multitude of belief systems, of knowledge, of understanding that is lost when we only have conversations about black and white. So
tell me more. What is the big untold story? We're obviously a news organization.
Yeah.
What kind of things should we and the media be looking at in order to broaden that perspective or include those other stories?
Boy, there's so much.
There's a list.
There's so much, but I think part of that conversation has to include the contributions of people in that middle ground, the understandings that people have about society, about religion, about economics, about any number of issues that are frankly lost in the black and white conversation. but there's a richness there, a richness of thought, of perspective that I think we lose when we don't include them.
Francisco Vasquez is here. He's a retired executive director of Child and Family Services. Executive director or president?
President and CEO.
Okay, I'll say that again.
Yeah.
Francisco Vasquez is here. He's retired president of Child and Family Services in Buffalo. He's on the board of the Racial Equity Roundtable, has been involved in many of those issues for a long time. Fast forward, we started talking about your origin story.
Sure.
Fast forward to Buffalo and the time when you may have just arrived here, I imagine for college?
No, actually, my wife is from Buffalo, and
Okay.
so we moved here after we lived in Arizona for many years. Yeah.
Did you find Buffalo to be a racist city? More so than maybe anything you had experienced in Arizona?
I remember my first year in Buffalo, I wondered why people were so depressed. A lot of very kind people, a lot of, it's a city of neighbors. I get that. I understood that. I experienced that. But people were down in the dumps, is the way I described it, long faces. And I began to understand why. I began to understand that the economy was in poor shape. I began to understand that the steel plants had closed and a lot of the ramifications of that were lingering. I began to understand also how it was a zero-sum proposition where if one side excelled, the other, it was at the expense of the other. And that's what I saw in Buffalo as a result. So when we talk about race, that's what I saw. I saw the people of color pursuing opportunity, but being viewed as that it was at the expense of whites in our community. So there was this tension that I sensed at the very beginning. I became interested in understanding that further. That's why I began to engage in other community conversations about race.
I think of all the times, and this is probably universal, people will go to a wake and see an old relative.
Yeah.
Oh, gee, it's sad that we have to meet under these circumstances. Similarly, talk about the sadness, or maybe even the hope, that springs from the Tops shooting, because the community could perhaps now focus more on racial issues.
Yeah. More recently, I was asked to serve on an advisory committee with a national. It's called a Compassion Fund. It's a singular, trustworthy repository of funds that would be used to help people who were victims of the shooting. I heard a lot of stories at the public hearing, a lot of stories of the terror that people experienced. We all of us are in mourning. All of us still can't grasp what really happened there. I remember hearing the news on television and my jaw dropping, and then having a family member call and say, "Oh, it's going to be a hot summer in Buffalo," and again, it was code for the racial strife, and an assumption that it was about the blacks rather than a white supremacist who came and murdered our brothers and sisters in that community. So that isn't lost in how I view this. It is a horrible tragedy. Lives will be affected by this forever and ever, and we need to be mindful that our community is affected in a very profound way. I cannot go into that community and profess to know an answer to the issues. I have to be in a position to listen and to help that community find its way. But we need to be supportive of that. I'm hopeful that the conversations that we will have in the wake of the shootings will be different, will be much more accepting of that other perspective, of that other view. But I also am a realist and understand that that hearts and minds don't just change just because of things like this.
I was just going to take you there. I've had other people on this program, most notably I think of Jomo Okono, who was involved in Juneteenth. And he was talking about how last year the vision of Derek Chauvin's knee on George Floyd's neck wasn't just in the media. It was in people's living rooms. They were seeing it on TV. It was a moment that he said kind of crystallized the nation. But things didn't change. We still have a top shooting. Is that where your caution comes from, that society is slow to change?
Very much so, because I think that the roots of our racial issues are systemic, and we're all victims, if you will, of our own doing, of our own of the systems that we create. We as human agents create these social structures. We create the laws that govern our lives. We create the responses to issues that through religion, through economy, through any number of social structures. And when we get sufficiently tired of the implications of that, we begin to activate to change that. So I'm hopeful in that sense, but I'm also wary that we're not done yet. There's a lot more that has to change systemically in order for us to affect our lives in a positive way.
In large part, I think you've identified a little bit of the dichotomy, too. There is the attitudinal shift. Blacks and whites and Hispanics and everybody need to understand each other more, attitudinally. But because they haven't, out of that also springs all sorts of systemic things. We can talk about redlining, we can talk about disinvestment, we can talk about segregation. Is addressing the attitudinal stuff enough to change the systemic stuff? Or should we just, I had a guest on the program recently that just say, starfish washes up on the beach, you toss one starfish at a time back into the ocean, and you're at least saving one starfish. Do we attack each one of those systemic starfishes, or do we need to do something more attitudinally, more broadly? I
think emotionally I want to attack the attitudes. Realistically, I think there is greater success, greater value in changing systems, because I think hearts and minds change when we become accustomed to a different structure. We become more accepting of it because we have to behave that way. We create those structures to govern our lives. And for very appropriate reasons. So I think that changing systems actually results in the changing of hearts and minds eventually. It takes a long time, though.
That's interesting because I think the conventional wisdom would be the other way around.
Right.
Change the attitudinal stuff and the systems will follow.
Right.
But you're saying the systemic change would have obviously a bigger impact.
I believe so. The idea that the hearts and minds of people, that if I go talk to somebody about race and how we ought to be more accepting and to behave differently, and that person views that as a zero-sum proposition, meaning if my black brothers and sisters gain, then I, as a white person, lose.
Have lost. Right.
Have lost. I don't know how you change the hearts and minds of that person. But if we view it as a systems issue, then everybody, there's a commonality there. All of us want to succeed. All of us want to work. All of us want to be productive. All of us want to have a say in our lives. And if we can create structures that help define how that is done, then I think hearts and minds change. The other part of that is that we want to call people into the conversation. We don't want to call them out. And so when you approach it from a hearts and minds approach, inevitably you're going to say these are the people that are the racists, and these are the people that are not. Well, you've just called them out, and I want to talk to that racist, but I want to talk to that racist in
a way that does not alienate him or her.
In the context of the structures, how people, how all of us may benefit from the way we engage with the structures that we establish.
What does, and this is a broad question, but I think it's also an easy way, and I've almost used it too much, but it's an easy way to wind down the interview. What does Buffalo need? What's step number one?
Oh, goodness. I think step number one is for us to pay greater attention to the disparity that exists in our communities of color. Primarily, even though there are pockets of areas on the west side, primarily on the east side. And the reason I say that is because I think that the if you look at the disparities in economy, in healthcare, in education, you see much more impact in the east side. I think there are so many needs across the Buffalo area, but in particular, I see where there is a lack of opportunity on the east side. When you look at Tops being the only grocery store on the east side, and the food deserts that exist, if you look at the housing, the affordable housing on the east side, you then begin to understand where the attention has to be focused. I think many parts of our community have benefited from public and private investment.
But others have not.
But others have not. And so that's what I would say that we need to address.
Francisco, thanks so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you, Dave.
Francisco Vasquez is President Emeritus and CEO of Child and Family Services, chatting with us today on Buffalo What's Next. More conversations tomorrow, right here on WBFO and WBFO HD1 Buffalo, WOLN Olean, and WUBJ Jamestown, your NPR stations. I'm Dave Debo. Thanks for listening.